Travis.
Members of the Commission, Director Melcher. For the record, Tom Thornton, the Program Manager.
Tom, stand here.
We'll start over. Chair Finley, members of the Commission, Director Melcher. For the record, Tom Thornton, Game Program Manager. Before you now regarding the Access and Habitat Program, I'm standing in for Travis Schultz, who wasn't able to be here today. First, I'll provide a brief overview of the Access and Habitat Program, then the one project for Commission consideration today. In your packet, there were two project proposals. The second one, the Aspen Valley Habitat Project, has been withdrawn. It is no longer necessary to switch that project onto Access and Habitat funding. The deadline for the federal funding has been extended, so those funds can be used for the prescribed burn as originally planned. Access and Habitat Program was created by the 1993 Oregon Legislature. It has two primary purposes: to provide funding for projects that improve wildlife habitat or provide public hunting access to private lands. Ideally, projects will have both components. Projects that have both components and that recognize the contribution of landowners and address damage caused by wildlife, or have a way to stretch their funding, whether it's by using volunteers or matching funds or given additional weight. The program is funded by three major sources. First, the primary source is a $4 surcharge on hunting licenses. That generates about $1.7 million per biennium. Next, each year the sale of 5 auction deer tags and 5 auction elk tags and 5 raffle deer tags and 5 raffle elk tags. In total, those bring in about $1 million per biennium. And last, a small portion, about $80,000 per biennium, comes from the department's habitat programs. The total budget is about $2.8 million per biennium. The project before you today, the Rice property, is part of the Glass Hill access area. This area was created initially in 2008. There are 3 private landowners that are cooperators along with the department's Landmarsh Wildlife Area. Collectively, the area is about 4,200 acres. Dr. Rice's property provides important year-round wildlife habitat, and this project would provide continued public access to just over 900 acres of private land for the 3 years. The landowner would be paid $1.80 an acre, which is about just over $1,600 a year for each year of the enrollment. And the primary opportunities on his property are for big game hunting and upland bird hunting. And the property is in the Starkey Wildlife Management Unit. The project was unanimously approved by both the regional council in the Northeast and by the state board, and it also has a lot of strong support from the Wildlife District. The area is just south of LeGrand. You can see it from LeGrand. The area in blue on the map is Dr. Rice's property. The solid yellow is welcome to hunt, and the yellow with the horizontal lines is by permission, as is Dr. Rice's. The by permission lands are booked on a first come, first served basis, which is administered by the LeGrand, our ODFW office. Staff recommendation is to approve the Rice Access Project as proposed by the department. And with that, I can take questions now or after any public testimony, although when I looked, there wasn't any.
for public testimony, commissioners, so any questions?
I have a question. It's not about this, and I know this isn't your specific program, Tom, so I don't, it's kind of out of bounds, let me know. You know, one of the drums that I continually beat is about the focus on this more, predominantly more on access than habitat improvement. So I'm just kind of recalling, so maybe partly in response to that, maybe not. Another little small fund was developed just strictly for habitat projects. I think it was $30,000 or something like that. Do you, is Kurt here? So I'm wondering, was that expended? Was that renewed in this next biennial budget cycle? Or I don't remember what happened with that. Is that ringing a bell? You look a little puzzled.
Chair Finley, Commissioner Woolley, what comes to my mind is each of the 6 regional coordinators were provided a few $1,000s for habitat projects in their region. And I know that some of that money has been expended for seed and for different things, but I don't know the details of what it's been used for.
So I could circle back to the program coordinator on that. Yeah. Okay, that's fine, thanks.
Other questions? Okay, I'm ready for a motion.
I move to approve funding for the 2 projects recommended by the Access and Habitat Board.
A second.
Moved by Commissioner Spelnick and seconded by Commissioner Woolley. Do you have a question? Sure.
Clarification, it's just one project, right?
Yes, just the one. I'm slow today. Okay, just one project. Okay, all in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, it passes unanimously. All right. Exhibit D.
Where's it hidden?
All right, gentlemen.
Chair Finley, members of the commission, Director Melcher, for the record, Tom Thornton, Game Program Manager. We are before you today at this time regarding the 2020 big game regulations. Today's presentation will begin with an overview of some of the general regulation changes, followed by species-specific information, which will begin with Derek Roman covering bear and cougar. Don Whitaker will follow with information regarding ungulate species. And during the ungulate portion of the presentation, Nick Myatt, the project lead for the Big Game Review Project, will provide some additional information for a few of the proposals that were more complicated or generated much of the public comment that you've seen. The 73-acre Courtney Creek Wildlife Area, it's outlined in the map, is located adjacent to I-5, just immediately north of the Brownsville exit, which is between Springfield and Albany. The department is proposing to add administrative rules to gain more control of the area that unfortunately has become a common dump site and is used as a long-term camping location by some folks. There is a general open to wildlife-oriented use, but there are some restrictions, as you can see. Camping or overnight stay is prohibited in the areas close to the public from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. It's also the use of firearms or discharging firearms is limited to during the game bird or game mammal seasons. Another general regulation, while most hunters understand that traditional bows are long bows and recurves, the department does receive questions about what is legal during traditional archery hunts. The definition proposed would reduce the number of calls we get asking if sights are allowed or if wooden arrows are required. It will also remove the need to add text specifying long and recurve bows only when traditional archery is mentioned. To improve enforceability, the state police have asked that lawfully obtained be added to the possession regulations related specifically to shed antlers. The addition will help in cases where the shed antlers were picked up while trespassing or in violation of a wildlife area closure. It just makes it clear that under those conditions, if they pick them up, they aren't allowed to keep them. For legislative changes, House Bill 2068 raised the maximum number of spring bear tags that can be issued to non-residents from 5% from previously 3%. It also raised the non-resident cap for cougar tags, but really that has no effect at this time because there are no controlled hunts for cougar currently. Leftover tags are tags remaining after the controlled hunt drawing for hunts where there were more tags offered than there were applicants. In the past, the statute required leftover tags to be distributed first come, first served. House Bill 2069 modified the statute so it now allows limiting leftover tags to hunters who do not already have a tag. The proposal is that in 2020, leftover tags will not be available as an additional tag. Also by statute, hunters can obtain only one controlled hunt tag for bighorn sheep in a lifetime. House Bill 2071 creates an exemption for bighorn sheep ewe hunts. The department will continue to look for opportunities to relocate bighorn sheep, but with this change, if ewe hunts are proposed in the future to manage the herd health, they would not be a hunter's once-in-a-lifetime bighorn hunting opportunity. Urine can contain the prions that are the source of chronic wasting disease. House Bill 2294 bans the use and possession of commercial cervid attractants, which are defined here on the screen. Attractants that contain or derived from cervid urine. The ban goes into effect January 1st of 2020. Oregon's ban is consistent with a recommendation from the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies that urged all states to regulate or to ban the use of cervid urine-based products to limit the spread of chronic wasting disease. These products have already been banned in other states, including Alaska and Louisiana. Hunters will be able to bring any product that they have currently. They can bring it into a department office and we'll collect it and incinerate it. It needs to be incinerated at over 1,800 degrees, so a lot of common fires won't accomplish that. Although not a regulation, I would like to to talk a little bit about the regulation review process that Nick mentioned earlier and Mark Duda also referred to as being part of it. The department initiated the big game hunting review in 2017, as Nick laid out. It's a three-phase project, hoping to accomplish a complete review of the big game regulation and the hunts throughout the state. Phase 1 focused on the regulations document, phase 2 on the hunting administrative rules, regulations, and the main priority for those first two phases, we're trying to simplify some of the concerns we'd heard from the public. Phase 3 is the ongoing review of all the hunting seasons. This project is a very high priority for the department. We strategically brought on an additional dedicated staff to lead the project. Nick Myatt organized a review team of field staff, including Oregon State Police, and throughout the process, he's worked hard to involve constituents and the commission. He's been before the commission, although several of you are new, he has been before the commission at least a couple times a year over the last couple of years. The team has also tried to maintain a consistent approach to accomplish project goals. The department has heard concerns from a few sport groups that some of these proposed changes are too much and too fast, but we have also heard from the other side of folks, side of the aisle, so to speak, that we're not doing enough, we're moving too slow, that the change is long overdue, and there needs to be significant changes to address the need for more opportunity. The department believes the proposal package for 2020 seasons is a great balance to move forward in a positive and strategic direction. The proposals before you today were made public in May and covered statewide at 23 public meetings that had almost 600 members of the public attend. Those were held during July. The next part of the phase 3 will begin in December and address different groups of seasons and continue to overlay the goals and what we're trying to accomplish. The next part of phase 3 will take a close look at Western Oregon deer and elk seasons, amongst other things. As with the changes proposed today, some of these changes have a real ripple effect. They're interconnected not only spatially on the ground, but also in the timing. And because of this, many of the changes cannot practically be phased in. They kind of need to occur simultaneously because there's a lot of overlapping parts. Continuing considerations include allocation of hunting opportunity, R3, hunter recruitment, retention, and reactivation efforts, and identifying opportunities still to simplify hunts statewide, in particular some of the boundaries that could still be easier to understand. And a consideration certainly for all of this is that we also need to meet the biological goals, the management objectives, and those types of things. And at this time, we'll move into the species-specific information and proposals.
Yeah, lean forward. Let's make sure project. Good morning, afternoon, cripes. Good afternoon, Sheriff Finley, members of the Commission, Director Melcher. For the record, Derek Broman, I'm the Carnivore Fur Bearer Coordinator. I'm going to be talking about our proposed bear and cougar regulations. For our black bear program in the state of Oregon, we follow the Oregon Black Bear Management Plan, which we've had a plan in place for about a little over 30 years now. Some of the requirements called for in this plan are a check-in of all known bear mortalities. So every dead bear that we know about, we lay hands on, whether it's roadkill, found dead, or a harvested animal, any of the above. We also have mandatory harvest reporting for anybody that has a bear tag. So that provides quite a bit of information for the state for decision making, and actually is one of the most rigorous and robust bear programs across western United States. So when the plan, and similar to a number of other western states, we look at a number of indices to try to find out what might be going on with our bear population. And so there's a number of indices here looking at the median age of bears, both males, females, and all bears combined. And as you can see on the screen and in your handout, that the level of hunter harvest is low or moderate across our population, which has really been kind of consistent for some time now. So it's a good sign that we have a healthy, robust bear population in the state. In addition to looking at median ages, we also have some other indices that we look at. One is a 3-year average of male bears aged 5 and above. And again, just the quick take home is that we're not in the red. We have the total mortalities. This is hunting and other sources. We're not heading into any indication that we have a population decline or any concerns. And then we also look at the 3-year average of all females across all mortality sources. And like many species, females, adult females especially, are the greatest limiting factor in a population. So we have 30% of females occurring across all mortality sources, which is right on that edge of being light and moderate for total mortality for bear, which is a good sign for our bear population. So Nick's not going to touch on any of the big game hunt review for bear or cougar, so I'm going to be touching on those things. And really, there was not that much comment on the bear proposals throughout this rigorous public process. We are proposing to change our spring bear season dates, so that way they are the same statewide. Currently, Western Oregon and a few places in Eastern Oregon start at April 1st and go to May 31st. Other areas in Eastern Oregon go from April 15th through May 31st. So now this will be an April 1 to May 31 statewide. We don't expect to see much for an increased harvest because bears are later to emerge, and so we don't expect there to be all that much of a change. We're proposing to combine or consolidate a number of hunts. We're taking 3 hunts in Northwest Oregon and combining them into a hunt called Northwest Oregon. We're also taking 2 hunts, the White River and the Hood unit hunts, and combining those into a single hunt. We're also adding a couple wildlife management units to current hunts. We're adding the Willamette unit to the Northwest Oregon hunt, and we're adding the Grizzly and Ochoco units to the South Blue Mountain hunt. And there's a couple units where we're actually expanding the boundaries. Currently, the McKenzie and Sandy Am units are limited for spring bear harvest in national forests, so the eastern part of those units in the Cascades. We are proposing to make that unit wide. So while a number of these spring bear hunts are talking about expanding the areas of the hunt, we're not actually increasing the tag numbers. So for all of these hunts, we're increasing the area where people can go, but not the number of tags. So actually we would be likely spreading out the hunters even more. So do not expect to see substantial changes based on these proposals. So in the spring bear hunt, we're proposing just about 9,500 controlled hunt tags. Half of those are across 16 hunts around the state. And then there is one large controlled hunt in Southwest Oregon where there's 4,400 tags allocated. No changes in protecting cubs and sows with cubs and continuing our mandatory check-in, which we continue to see pretty good check-in rates based on our hunter harvest and our mandatory reporting. As far as the 2020 bear general season, similarly, we're proposing to change season dates so that way they're consistent statewide. In Eastern Oregon, the general bear season ends November 30th. We are proposing to extend it to December 31st like it is in Western Oregon, and that way we would have a consistent date statewide. Kind of the opposite situation about our spring bear hunt. A lot of bears are starting to head into hibernation and into their dens for winter. So, and a lot of hunters are kind of getting out of the field. A lot of our major hunts are over at that point. So while hunters could harvest bears, we don't expect to see a lot of effort on harvesting bears. Modification of our tag sale deadline just to account for the calendar shift. We are proposing one change to our season structure in that we're still having a 2 bear tag opportunity. However, previously, if you were to get an additional tag, it would be limited to Southwest Oregon. And instead, we are proposing that additional tag would be good statewide. That's consistent with our cougar program, and that second tag And so again, it'd just be much simpler. Continuing to protect cubs and sows with cubs, and continuing our mandatory check-in. So we have these indices. We have a lot of ways in which we collect information from the public, from hunters, from carcasses, etc. But we're also looking to try to add another tool in our toolbox for monitoring, and that we are already in the stages of having a black bear model developed. So that would be one more tool for us to be able to look at management changes and any trends in our bear populations. And then I'll tell you that the researchers are actually very excited to be working with the state of Oregon because we do have more data, more information than most states. So for cougars, similar to black bears, we follow, cougar management is dictated by the Cougar Management Plan, Oregon Cougar Management Plan. Similar, we have check-ins for all known cougar mortalities, and we do have mandatory harvest reporting. For cougars, we break the state up into 6 different zones, zone A through F. So in the Cougar Management Plan, the very first objective is to have a statewide cougar population that is not to fall below 3,000 cougars, and that's across all age classes. We have a cougar population model for each one of those 6 zones, and by summing the population estimates for each of those zones, we come up with a total statewide estimate of about 6,400 6,400 cougars in 2018. Similar to bears, we have some indices that we look at to try to see if there's any indication on population health or trends. One of the things that we look at are the 3-year average of proportion of adult females in the total mortality. And as you can see there, all those squiggly lines represent individual zones, and we're all in the green area, so we're not seeing any impact to our cougar populations in each zone. No decline is expected. Our hunt structure follows a zone quota approach, but it's a bit of a misnomer. They're actually mortality caps. In order for us to achieve that first objective, not having numbers fall below 3,000, we have mortality caps in place for each of the zones. However, if the cap is reached during the calendar year, hunting is eliminated or prohibited for the rest of that calendar year. However, cougars still can be taken on damage, that's in statute, and any known cougar mortality that we're made aware of adds to that number. So you see in 2018, we had one zone that reached that quota, that's in Zone A. The final total number of mortalities at the end of the year was 193, but that's because we closed harvest, I think it was in late November, but continue to have more cougars show up as roadkill, taking on damage, human safety, etc. And so Zone A over the last 10 years, 11 years has been the only zone to make that quota or hit that quota. And right now we're quite a few number of animals behind we were at our point last year. So don't expect to be reaching that quota this following year, or this current year. So really no changes to our cougar seasons. We continue to have a year-round season, but following those mortality quotas, continue to have a 2-tag opportunity. No changes to the zone quotas because we're just not hitting them. There doesn't appear to be a need to change those quotas. And continue mandatory check-in and protections of kittens and females with kittens. So I think we're now ready for the ungulate portion of things.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Good. As we shuffle the computer around here, good afternoon. I'm Don Whitaker. I'm the ungulate coordinator here in the Wildlife Division, headquartered in Salem. Today I'll be covering our proposals in cooperation with Nick here on all of our ungulate species. Make the computer work. We'll start right off with bighorn sheep. If we look at our population monitoring with bighorn sheep, For the most part, we're doing okay. We have two subspecies of bighorn sheep in Oregon, the California bighorn sheep that occurs primarily in the drier, more deserty type habitats, and then we have Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep in northeast Oregon. We saw a slight decline in California bighorn sheep. We're still recovering from some disease issues that we found about 6 or 8 years in far southeast Oregon and the Hawaii River country and over toward the almost the Trout Creek Mountains. Our Rocky Mountain bighorns are slowly and steadily just kind of perking along with some slight increases here and there, a little bit of decline in some local herds, but we're not doing too bad. From a management action standpoint, we're currently planning to move quite a few animals this winter. We're planning to capture about 34 animals out of the Interstate 84 herd. That's a very popular herd. It's very visible. We get lots of really good comments and feedback when people are driving 70 mile an hour, see sheep and call and say, is that really what I saw? And we were able to say yes. We're planning to move 5 animals over to 30 Mile Canyon in the John Day River system. That's to kind of stretch that herd range out a little bit. We're working collaboratively with the state of Utah. They're actually sending an entire crew over here in December, and they're going to go home with 25 of those animals to augment some release efforts they're doing in, I believe it's Antelope Island in the Great Salt Lake. And then we're going to provide 3 females and a male to restart a population at the Denver Zoo. We're also going to do about 40 animals as part of our ongoing stepped up effort to monitor for disease issues. We're going to catch 30 animals in the Aldrich and McClellan herds, and then 10 more down in the Riverside herd. Consistent with all of the objectives of the regulations review process, we're going to have a number of changes in our bighorn sheep seasons proposed for 2020. Along with the 76 tags we're proposing in the controlled hunts, with 5 of those being non-residents, we're going to combine what is currently 6 hunts in the John Day River system, 3 successive hunts on each side of the river, into 3 successive hunts that include both sides of the river, and that's providing a much better and more desirable opportunity for a species that is incredibly sought after by our hunting public. We're going to improve the quality of the hunt in the Aldridge mountain area by taking 2 existing hunts and combining those into a longer season. And we're going to make dates consistent or expand season dates in 21 existing hunts. And 4 of our hunts are getting expanded boundaries, primarily to include the whole unit where those hunts occur. For Rocky Mountain goats, those populations we have in Oregon are doing quite well. They continue to grow and expand slightly. I believe in the field reports, there's some notes in there that we tried to move some goats from the Elkhorn Mountains to the Wallowa Mountains, and the goats didn't cooperate as they normally do. We were only able to get 4 when we wanted somewhere in the neighborhood of 20, but we still did okay. For 2020, we're proposing 27 tags. 2 of those are non-residents for bighorn sheep and for Rocky Mountain goats. Statute says we have to allocate 2 non-residents between 5% and 10% of the controlled tags. We always shoot for somewhere right there in the middle. That gives us a little bit of buffer if we have issues with any of our hunts. It's very challenging to work with the non-residents sometimes if we have to close a hunt that they might have applied for and make sure they're still in. We're proposing 2 new hunts next year. One would be the South Wallowa Mountains and the other one is in Copper Creek. And similar to sheep and consistent with the regulations review, we're expanding 13 hunts for a more standardized season, creating a much better opportunity, and 5 additional hunts are getting some boundary changes that are going to simplify those hunt boundaries. For pronghorn antelope, population-wise, we're seeing they're slow to recover from the harsh winter from several years ago, and then another one that wasn't necessarily real good for them. So we saw a slight decline in our pronghorn populations for 2019. We're still right in that 20,000 animal mark, so we're okay, but we're watching them a little bit. For 2020, we're proposing 2,270 tags, and you'll note that on the screen in the PowerPoint, I have the total tag numbers changed a little bit, or highlighted that. I want to point out that we had a late change in the tag numbers for one of our hunts, the Beulah hunt in eastern Oregon over there. We're changing the tag numbers and dropping those from, I think it's 27 down to 11. And that's in response to the poor performance of that population as a result of the winter situation we've had recently. We're proposing to consolidate 7 hunts into 4 hunts, expand the dates for 3 hunts, and again, we're working on those boundaries to simplify or make them easier to understand or make them unit-wide. For mule deer populations, our mule deer in eastern Oregon have been struggling for quite some time. They also have been slow to recover from a couple of winters in the last 4 years that really kind of hit them pretty hard. We had, at this point, looking at the 2018 population data, almost 3/4 of our WMUs, or a little more than 3/4 of our WMUs with mule deer are 75% or less of the management objective for that unit. We're continuing to work on those, and we're watching pretty closely as we go through the future here. Okay, I gotta catch up. For 2020, we're proposing a total of about 62,735 tags. That's only a slight decline, 2.2% in total, with most of that occurring in the number of buck tags that we're offering in 2020. With that, I'll let Nick jump in here for a little while, and we'll talk about some more proposed changes.
All right, good afternoon. Again, Nick Myatt, project lead for the Big Game Hunting Review. I think we need a few more people at the table up here with us today. So, as Tom mentioned, I'm going to be focusing on the proposed changes to deer and elk hunting seasons that have primarily come out of the complete review that we've done of our hunting seasons. And I'm going to start with just a overview summary and then focus some detailed information on the science and the reasoning behind some of our proposals that have generated the majority of the public comment. So starting with our controlled buck deer hunts, we have 13 hunts where we're proposing to expand or simplify the hunting boundary. 13 hunts we're proposing to change the bag limit. We have 3 unit-wide bow hunts that we're proposing to consolidate into one 3-unit hunt. But then we also have one regional muzzleloader hunt that is very complicated in how we display that hunt to the public. So we're proposing to deconstruct that hunt into 4 separate hunts that are just unit-wide hunts. And then the final proposals I wanted to touch on are related to the Southeast White Horse Archery Hunt and the Juniper Muzzleloader Hunt. These are, at the time they were created to be very high quality, sought after hunting opportunities. Low tag numbers take a lot of preference points in time for hunters to draw. However, over time, the populations in those areas have gone to a point where we can no longer provide a consistent quality hunting opportunity, and we've received quite a bit of unfavorable feedback from hunters that have had those tags in the past few years. So we're proposing to eliminate those hunts, and we've gotten a fair amount of public comment in support of that. But to replace that opportunity for and desire of hunters for us to have some very high quality type late season mule deer hunting opportunities, we're proposing 3 new mule deer hunts. One is in the Heppner unit, another in the fossil unit. Both of those would only have 10 tags in each hunt and be in the November time frame, which is a very sought after time frame. And then the third would be in the John Day River Canyon and have 20 tags in those hunts. We expect those hunts to be very popular, and a lot of hunters put in for those controlled hunts. So for antlerless deer, we are proposing to consolidate 16 hunts into 7 hunts. For 16 hunts, we're looking at expanding or simplifying the dates of those hunts. And most of those are proposals to lengthen the dates of our unit-wide 600 series hunts in all of our coastal wildlife management units to match our current primary buck deer seasons. In 17 hunts, looking at boundary expansions or simplifications, we have 1 new youth hunting opportunity that we're proposing. And then finally, proposing a change to the bag limits in 38 hunts. And wanted to touch on where most of those changes are. I believe all of those bag limit changes are related to our black-tailed deer hunts in Western Oregon. So our current bag limit is 1 buck having not less than a forked antler for our buck deer seasons. And for our antlerless deer seasons, the bag limit is 1 antlerless or spike deer. So the key issue here is really where we include the harvest of spike bucks, whether it's in our buck season or in doe seasons. There's no scientific basis for our current bag limit of not allowing the harvest of spikes during buck season. We believe this unnecessarily reduces hunter success during our primary deer seasons. And for wildlife managers, they issue antlerless deer tags with the intent of harvesting does for population control or for damage type hunts. However, if you look at our data, we have many hunters that are targeting spike bucks during those hunts. And a lot of our 600 series antlerless hunts end up with 35 to upwards of 50% of the harvest being of spike deer instead of antlerless deer. So there's a common misconception amongst some of our hunters that if a deer is a spike buck, that means it's a 1-year-old deer, and if it's a 2-point, then it means it's a 2-year-old deer, which is not the case. The number of antler points on particularly our yearlings is really dependent on the nutrition that deer receives, and then also on the genetics of that deer. We do have 2 different department data sets which shed some light on the proportion of yearling bucks that are currently legal in the buck harvest and not. So in those 2 data sets, between 36 and 43% of yearling bucks had 2 or more antler points that would make them legal to harvest during the buck season. So our current bag limit is focusing the harvest of yearling bucks on the healthiest bucks in the population, but it is protecting the less rigorous bucks in the population that have that lower nutritional level. And these are the yearlings that have the lowest postseason survival rate. So this is important for wildlife managers because we're protecting the deer that have the greatest or the deer that may die anyway after the hunting season, which is kind of one of the opposites of Wildlife Management 101, where you're trying to focus your harvest on animals that are going to die anyway. So our proposed bag limit is to move to 1 buck with visible antler for our buck deer hunts and 1 antlerless deer for our doe hunts. This would be easy to understand bag limit for hunters, and it would make our deer bag limits consistent statewide. It'd be less of an enforcement concern because instead of hunters having to tell how many points are on an antler or if a point is or is not a point, they would just have to determine if a deer does or does not have an antler. We believe this change would lead to a slightly higher success rate for hunters during our primary buck seasons And based on the survey data that you heard about this morning, we believe that it will also improve hunter satisfaction. This change would be an effort towards promoting hunter recruitment. It would be a scientifically justified bag limit. And then finally, it would help our wildlife managers because antlerless deer tags would only be used to harvest antlerless deer, which is the target of those hunts. So this proposal has been one of the top proposals for public comments that we've received. We've received some in favor and some opposed to the proposal. And the primary concerns that we have heard from the public is the first being that the proposed bag limit would lead to less big bucks in the population. And the second concern we've heard is that black-tailed deer populations cannot sustain higher buck harvest success, and that populations will decline because of this change in bag limit. And both of these concerns are really not supported by the science, and wanted to get into that a little bit more. Another common misconception is that antler point restrictions lead to more big bucks in a population, which is actually the opposite effect of what an antler point restriction does in a bag limit. Antler point restrictions force more harvest on the larger bucks because hunters that would have filled their tag earlier on a spike buck are forced to continue hunting and wait for a buck with more antler points. So we do have in Oregon right now, we have half of the state in our mule deer areas where the harvest of spikes is allowed during our primary buck seasons versus in Western Oregon where it's not allowed. So we can compare that data to look at the impact of potential bag limit change. And we do see when you look at the proportion of spikes in our buck population, with black-tailed deer in Western Oregon, 18% of the males are spike bucks, and with mule deer in Eastern Oregon, 16% are spike bucks. So we have really similar ratios of spikes, regardless of the bag limit differences. That second public concern that we've heard a lot is about the potential for a drastic population decline from the bag limit change. And if you recall last month when Dr. Dwayne Jackson presented to the commission about some of the work that his shop is doing with black-tailed deer, he mentioned that the buck deer in a population are really not driving recruitment and the trends in that population. Population and recruitment is really driven by survival of adult does and the survival of their fawns, which ultimately is tied to nutrition and habitat type conditions. So a change in the bag limit should not influence the population over the years. And then as far as having adequate number of bucks in the population to sustain a increase in harvest, currently all but one wildlife management unit in Western Oregon has met or exceeded our buck ratio benchmarks in at least 2 of the last 3 years. And this is data is based off of spotlight surveys, which we've done for many decades. However, we have information that shows that methodology of doing spotlight surveys significantly underestimates the number of bucks in a population. And that's based on some previous remote camera work done in Southwest Oregon, which shows much higher buck ratios than the spotlight surveys done in those same areas. And then also the Dr. Jackson's fecal DNA work that he presented to the commission on last month. The preliminary data from this work shows that he's finding over 50 males per 100 females in those units that he's working in, where our spotlight surveys tend to show 20 to 25 bucks. So we do believe there are adequate bucks in the populations currently to sustain a slightly higher harvest level. And just to close up this issue, just wanted going back to Dr. Jackson's presentation last month. We talked about a lot of the work and the studies that he's doing is setting the stage for just better scientific management of black-tailed deer in the future. And this proposed change to bag limit, we believe, is just one more step in more scientific-based management of black-tailed deer in the future. So this slide shows all of our proposed general deer seasons, and as you can see, we would now have consistent bag limits for our primary buck hunts statewide. And these are the primary bag limits, but we also have some hunts that have an expanded bag limit as well. And then for the dates, just the same as we've had in past years, just a shift in the calendar year, moving the dates back a little bit. And then now Don is going to talk to us about elk population status.
Right, back to me. So elk, we have two subspecies. In Western Oregon, generally, we look at west of the Cascade Crest, we have Roosevelt elk. Eastern Oregon, east of the Cascade Crest, we have Rocky Mountain elk. Our Rocky Mountain elk are actually, based on our population estimates, are right there at our MO. They're doing pretty good, and for a number of years, if we look at our Rosies, they're still down a little bit, but they're flat. They're not declining. For Roosevelt elk, 38% of those WMUs in Western Oregon are below 75% of their population management objective. Conversely, if we look at Eastern Oregon, where we're talking Rocky Mountain elk, over 80% of our WMUs are 75% or greater relative to their population MO. For our controlled elk tag proposals, we have, even with all of the changes that Nick's going to talk about here, the change in controlled tags is just ever so slight. It's a total of a 0.4% increase in controlled tags. So really, for elk, we're in really good shape, and we'll let Nick take it home here with some of the season proposals.
Yeah, and going back to what Don said, just wanted to emphasize that we typically provide this comparison of this year's hunting season versus next year's hunting season with controlled hunt tags. But this year it's really a apples to oranges comparison, because we have some areas that we're taking out of general season and putting into a controlled hunt. And then we have quite a few areas that we're proposing to take out of controlled hunting and establish a new general season as well. So while this shows a increase, a percent change of 0.4%, we believe the overall elk hunting opportunity is a much larger increase than that. So for our controlled elk hunts, we have 87 hunts that we're proposing to consolidate into 31 hunts. We're looking at expanding the season or creating a simpler season structure in 25 hunts, simplifying or expanding the controlled hunt boundary in 25 hunts. We have 5 bag limits that we're making more consistent with our other hunts in the state, and then we have 6 new proposed hunting opportunities. So now focusing on a few of the elk proposals that have generated the majority of public interest. The first is our package of proposals to expand traditional archery hunting in the state. Currently, there's a small portion of the Murders Creek Wildlife Management Unit that where we prohibit hunting with compound bows during the first 7 days of the general archery season. This area is known as the Canyon Creek Archery Area, where you can only use traditional bows for that first 7 days. From our survey data that we did this year, we see that 1% of Oregon hunters prefer to hunt with traditional archery equipment. And from my conversations with traditional archers and our local staff, just anecdotal evidence suggests that while the Canyon Creek area in the past used to be pretty popular, folks are feeling there's about 20 to 30 hunters maybe a year that are using that hunt area now. So just in a way to add some more information to that, I went out opening morning in the Canyon Creek area this year and drove every road within that hunt area and visited all the wilderness trailheads within the hunt area. And I found 5 vehicles parked at the wilderness trailheads, 2 vehicles within the hunt area, and then an additional 2 vehicles that were on the boundary that could have been either traditional or compound archery hunters. So from that opening day experience, I think that anecdotal evidence of 20 to 30 hunters is about right, if not higher than what we're experiencing there now with hunters. So what point I wanted to make there is we do have a very small portion of our archery hunters that are looking at that opportunity and using that opportunity, but it adds significant complication to our general archery season regulations. So to meet the goals of our project, we are proposing to allow all archery hunting within the Murders Creek management unit during the general archery season. So the Oregon traditional archers have been very involved in our project and attending our public meetings around the states and the various sport group leaders meetings that we've held and attending our commission meetings. And in our conversations with them, they have expressed interest in expanding traditional archery hunting opportunity in the state. And I do just want to caveat that by expanding opportunity to hunt with traditional archery equipment when there are not other archery hunters out is really the interest. Traditional archery equipment can be used in all of our archery seasons in the state, almost a statewide general season, as well as all of our other seasons, such as our general Cascade season and our coastal seasons as well. We can use those weapon types. But in talking with them, interested in expanding opportunity and to balance the change that we're proposing for the Murders Creek Wildlife Management Unit, we are proposing to create a new traditional only archery hunt in the North Fork of the John Day Wilderness. This is an elk hunt that would have 50 tags, and it would be the 5 days after general archery season, which is absolute just prime time for elk hunting in a very highly sought after elk area. And also wanted to note that this tag would also be valid as a general archery tag during the normal archery season. So hunters could hunt that Canyon Creek area or anywhere else during the general archery season in the state. We expect this to be a real good quality opportunity. And then we're also committing to proposing 2 new traditional only archery hunts in Western Oregon for the 2021 hunting season. And we're not proposing that this year just because we know over the next year we want to review all of our late season hunting opportunities. We didn't want to propose something this year that we have to turn around and change next year. But in discussions with traditional archers, they're interested in seeing some opportunity in Western Oregon that's a little closer to home for many of their hunters. But as part of this, we also want to address complexity in our 2 existing traditional only archery hunts. One of those is the Trout Creek traditional archery mule deer hunt in far southeast Oregon. And this hunt is a controlled hunt, but it has an unlimited number of tags. It's the only situation like that we have in the state. So we're proposing to go to a set number of tags. There's currently 40 to 80 hunters that go on the ground and hunt each year in that hunt. So we're proposing to issue 300 tags for that hunt, which is the current number of people that draw the tags today. But there's a lot of people that get those tags that don't actually go hunting. And then finally, as I've already mentioned, we'd be proposing to allow all archery hunting in the Murders Creek Wildlife Management Unit. So in summary, this package of proposed changes for traditional archery hunting, we believe it would increase opportunity for traditional archers to have times where they can hunt without other archers. This would still allow traditional archery hunting within the Canyon Creek area. They would just have to hunt with compound bow archery hunters during that time period. This replaces a poor quality hunt with a very high quality hunt in the North Fork John Day Wilderness. We believe this meets the goals of our big game review by having a season that's based on hunter preference. The new hunts that we're proposing would increase hunter opportunity, and I believe this improves our regulations in a less complicated general season, which supports our hunter recruitment efforts. The next proposal I want to talk about is related to a new tool for us in our toolbox of dealing with chronic elk damage on private lands. One of our big struggles in many parts of the state is the continued increase of elk populations in private land agricultural areas. And one of our project objectives is to review our current hunting season structure and hunts and see if there's anything more that we can do to reduce elk populations on private land and shift those populations more towards public land where we know the majority of our hunters hunt. Right now, we primarily address chronic elk damage through controlled hunts, antlerless elk hunts, and through landowner damage program tags. However, despite having these tools for many years, private land elk populations continue to increase. So we wanted to really think outside the box and look at things, see if there's anything that we can do differently. So looking at those two tools that we use primarily, one again is controlled hunts. We try to look at what are the constraints of controlled hunts. And the first is with controlled hunt, there's a May 15th application deadline. So hunters must know, in some cases, up to 10 months in advance before hunting that they will have access to that private land and that elk will be present even on that private land that they have access to hunt. And then also, we're limiting tags in controlled hunts in many areas where unlimited tags are warranted due to the situation. And then the second tool is the landowner damage program tags. We currently issue about 3,500 to 4,000 of these tags around the state each year. These are tags that landowners with presently occurring damage can come into our office and get issued by our biologist. But these tags are only valid on an individual private landowner. So if a landowner arranges to have hunters go out and address a elk damage problem, but the elk move across the fence onto the neighbor's alfalfa field, those hunters can't pursue those elk even if they have permission. These tags can only be issued when our field staff are present at the office, which means weekdays and when our field staff are not in the field. The process is very time intensive for landowners and for our staff to get these tags. The tags are often issued when we already have existing controlled hunts in place. So we run into some conflicts between the two tag types. The damage tags are not linked into our mandatory reporting database, so it makes tracking the harvest and the use of these tags difficult. And then finally, most of the tags are being issued as a exchange for hunters that have already hunted and have an unfilled elk tag. So it's been utilized by many hunters as a second elk hunting opportunity. So our proposal is to pilot for the 2020 hunting season a new over-the-counter antlerless elk tag that will be valid in chronic elk damage areas that the department identifies and maps each year. These areas, the intent is to really replace the need for landowner damage program tags during these designated areas and time periods. It would not replace the landowner damage program. That program would still be there, but this elk damage tag would be a much simpler, easier, more convenient process for the landowners to use. So they shouldn't need to get landowner damage tags during that time. And then finally, to allow hunters and landowners to work directly together and as immediately as possible to address damage situations, we're proposing no tag sale deadline for these general elk damage tags. So this map shows the areas that we are proposing for this pilot year, next year's hunting season. So you can see in the map, there's two different colors. The yellow areas are areas, with the exception of the one area down by Medford, the rest of them are commission-adopted elk de-emphasis areas, which means we do not have management objectives for elk there, and we're really managing against elk populations in those areas. The tag would be valid from August 1st till March 31st in these areas. And then the pink areas in northeast Oregon, these are primarily irrigated agricultural valley areas, and the tag would be valid there from August 1st till November 30th. And the reason for the difference in dates is in those pink areas, we have migratory elk that move in out of the public land mountain areas that winter into those areas, and we don't want those populations to be available for harvest with these general season tags. And the final point I wanted to make with this, these dates in these hunt areas, we already have, in almost all of those areas, we have existing controlled hunts that are targeting those populations that have very similar time periods and date ranges for the hunts. So it's really shifting the method of tag and how we focus harvest on those animals. So as part of this proposal, we're proposing to eliminate 19 controlled hunts that would be replaced by this general elk damage season. And as part of that, we would also be changing how we approach the harvest of bull elk in the Columbia Basin. We're proposing a new Columbia Plateau controlled elk hunt, which would have a 1 elk bag limit for October 28th till November 30th. And then if hunters have not filled their tag, it would then turn into a antlerless elk tag for the remainder of the season until March 30th. We're also proposing to, for the wildlife management units that are in the Cascades, east of the crest of the Cascades, proposing to take those out of the current Cascade elk general season and establish 4 new controlled hunts. And this would have 2 benefits. One is it would improve our ability to meet our bull ratio objectives, which we're struggling to meet in some units in Central Oregon right now. And it would also make the boundaries of our primary Cascade buck season and Cascade elk season the same, have some consistent boundaries for hunters. And then finally, we're proposing to simplify the archery bag limit in the Heppner unit. And I did want to flag in your packet, it also said we were proposing that for the Sumter unit, and we're no longer proposing a change this year for the Sumter archery bag limit. So with those changes to general seasons, this is our general season structure that we're proposing with the addition of the general season elk damage tag, and then also just the change in season dates due to the shift in the calendar year. And then the final species I'd like to highlight is western gray squirrel. They're a game mammal, but we have them in our big game regulations, is where we communicate those seasons to the hunters. So what you see here is, for the most part, what we have now for gray squirrel seasons, with the following exceptions. We're proposing to move to set seasons that do not change each year with the shift in the calendar year. We're also proposing to generally move those seasons back about a week later. And then finally, we're including several units in Eastern Oregon where we have gray squirrel populations that have not been included in the hunting season in the past. All the proposed changes that we had for you today.
Okay, fellows. We have a number of people signed up. I'm going to bring them up in panels of 4, so pick up after public testimony. Okay, first panel, Al Elkins, Amy Patrick, Steve Hagan, and Craig Pfeiffer.
afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Al. I see you brought all OHA members, huh?
Yes,
Okay, go ahead.
this is the first, for the record, I'm Al Elkins, representing the Oregon Hunters Association. Chair Finley, members of the commission, and Director Melcher, I am here along with my colleagues to speak to agenda item Exhibit D 2020 Big Game Regulations, Seasons and Regulations. Over the past few months, OOHA staff and board members have reviewed the department's staff recommendations to the big game tag numbers, seasons, and regulations for 2020. OHA has evaluated each proposal with consideration of the resource as the first element. During our meetings with Fish and Wildlife staff, we shared our concerns and recommendations, but our efforts were not made part of the recommendations before you today. So what do we recommend as the next step? My colleagues that advocate for all things fish have suggested that they had a similar problem with recent fish regulations rewrite, and that the commission directed the new regulations not to be adopted, but a work group be formed to talk through the changes and come up with solutions to resolve the differences. We too would like to have such a work group established. We suggest a work group made up of biologists present and past, along with stakeholder group representatives. In closing, with my part, we ask for you to help in slowing this process down and taking a holistic approach to resolving concerns with these proposals. That concludes what I have to say. I will turn it over to Amy Patrick.
As you've ever testified.
Split out into four, that's why.
Good afternoon, Chair Finley, members of the Commission, Director Melcher. My name is Amy Patrick, and I also represent Oregon Hunters Association. I'll be speaking directly to the blacktail deer bag limit, and we feel that changing this regulation might make biological sense, but having the change occur over the full range of the species in Oregon does not seem consistent with Objective 4 of the 2008 Blacktail Management Plan. Objective 4 states manage blacktail deer populations to attempt to achieve buck ratios and populations at benchmark levels while collecting information over the next 5 years to develop management objectives. And as you've heard, Oregon has ongoing blacktail research, which shows a lot of promise. However, I would note that that's all preliminary data and has not been peer reviewed at this time. But be that as it may, it is recommended that perhaps we apply these new spike regulations to those areas where we have a more robust population knowledge so that we can test the effects of the proposals of the change, such as on the buck ratios. And this would be OHA's recommendation, as it's a slower and more measured approach, and it places population health as the top priority. Additionally, this particular topic has risen to the top of areas of concern regarding the proposed changes. A poll of our membership shows that at least 2/3 are opposed to the change, and several concerns have been raised regarding the speed of the implementation of this regulation change, as well as now a question regarding an accidental illegal harvest of a deer with very small, very short spike antlers during the antlerless hunting season, which, according to the 2008 Blacktail Management Plan, has been the primary reason spikes have been included in those hunts in Western Oregon in the past. So in light of these questions and concerns, we just recommend a more protracted and more systematic approach to the implementation of such a large amount of changes as you've seen over the presentation. And that concludes my portion, and I'm going to throw the rest of my time to Steve. Thank you.
Actually, you're signed up individually, so you can each use your time. Go ahead.
Chair Finley, members of the commission, Director Melcher, my name is Steve Hagan, and I am the Northwest Director at Large for Oregon Hunters Association. For reference, I am responsible and a liaison with the chapters from Astoria to Springfield and from Lincoln County to Gresham. That's 9 chapters of the 27 that are in our organization. Our concerns continue with the late season buck hunts for the Fossil, Hepner, and John Day units. While OHA always appreciates the opportunity for additional hunting opportunity, our feeling is that these particular units were not evaluated with regards to a statewide basis of where that additional hunting opportunity should occur. You just saw a slide there showing that mule deer trends in this state trending downward long term. The hunt that is proposed in the Hepner unit is proposed in a unit that is 61% of population MO. As of someone who sat on the Maori Mule Deer Initiative in trying to grow mule deer abundance in the state of Oregon, the organization simply doesn't feel that these are the appropriate units for this additional hunting opportunity. That doesn't mean other units couldn't be found, but we would like the opportunity to collaborate with the agency to determine what those units are. We offered suggestions in terms of rotating the hunts once per year. We also offered the opportunity and suggestion of sitting down with ODFW, and we got nothing back. Before I go to the next step, I want to applaud Nick for the effort of a lifetime. This is really a generational opportunity, and I don't expect us to see this happen again in my lifetime. This has been a holistic approach to look at hunting across the board, not the straightforward, here's what we're going to do next year, but what hunts make sense. We have been in partnership with them for 2.5 years now, and so far to this point, I think it's gone really well. We've done a significant number of outreach with both our members and members of the public on behalf of ODFW. Every single person that stopped at the Pacific Northwest show at the booth that I put in place I talked about this subject. This was important to everyone who hunts in the state of Oregon. Just letting you know that we did that outreach on behalf of the agency, not at the agency's request, but because it's important, and we pride ourselves in being a collaborative partner with ODFW. With regards to the general elk damage tags, the general hunt concept has resulted from a biopolitical process. But the question is, does it meet ODFW's stated goal of ensuring that hunting seasons meet biological objectives and maintain or improve overall hunting opportunity? OHA's concern is that there are no measures in place to ensure proper management of the harvest. We realize that the intent here is to replace an existing program. We've asked for sideboards, which exist in other hunts, of selling those tags and having the tag deadline sale 3 days before so that we do not open the opportunity to misuse of it. Thank you very much for your time. We would enjoy the opportunity for you to take some of the suggestions in our letter to heart. Thank you.
Greetings, Chairman Finley, ladies and gentlemen of the board, Director Melcher. My name is Craig Pfeiffer. I am a lifetime Oregonian. I am a lifetime OHA member. I happen to also work in the sporting optics industry that directly affects the hunters and outdoors people that propagate in our fields and forests. So I'm here mostly to talk about the stipulations of the changes that are going into place in these phases in this process, of which we've attested that there's been some frustrations from the public, the voices of the outdoors people and the hunters in this state, that we have not had an adequate amount of time to speak of the issues or a vector of how that information gets to the hunting groups or the outdoors groups. Case in point, there was an exhibit at this time last year which affected our business at 6 Hour Optics, that on level number 635-065-0745, that there was an addendum administered at the date of the hearing at the time of the presentation that the public would have no knowledge of to be able to discuss and have dialogue on. There was a change in that classification leading up to the meeting, which we are aware of, and directly related to our business, we were not impacted by that at that time. So with that said, we are challenged right now generationally with a growing, aging demographic within our state of hunters. The silent generation, more than likely are not in the field anymore. Baby boomers are slowly starting not to be in the woods. We have another roughly 13 years for the majority of those will be reached at age 65, which we know most people at age 65 start limiting the amount of time that they're in the woods hunting. So it leaves us to Generation X, which I fall into, the millennials beyond me, and then in the case of my children, Generation Z. So cases like this with this technology changes are fast coming in the field, whether it's an argument for fair chase or just what should be allowed and not allowed in comparison to what was allowed 50, 60, 30, 40 years ago. So technology is around us every day. You guys have brought it forth in the regulations and tagging process, so it's here to stay. So if we want to see the survival of our hunting heritage, we need to really continue to incorporate and work together to advance the technologies that are available to us that might encourage children of the next few generations to want to be in the field. Otherwise, our ability to protect our conservation of our land is going to be vastly diminished. Case in point, we know that a study that went from the early 90s to the 2016, there's an 18% decline in adult age hunters, of which 37% of those were 16 and over in that same period. So I'm here to talk about that, how we need to work together in a coalition, whether it's businesses alike like ourselves, better voice, reach with Oregon Hunters, Oregon Bow Hunter Association, all that, so we have more of a voice, so we're not in situations 20, 30 years ago, or from now when some of you are no longer necessarily involved with the process, but generations of mine are still needing to have plans to hunt and herds to be able to enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Commissioners, questions? Commissioner Woolley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was also hearing from OHA during the week, and a couple of concerns were brought up that I didn't hear mentioned among you, but I think is a concern of the organization. So I want to see if you had any comment on those. One was that this is regarding elk, and that the life cycles of the animals, particularly cows in their gestational period, and just the general biological concerns were not being considered enough with some of the timing. And I don't recall if this was for consideration for damage hunts or other ones. Concern about orphaning calves and late stage pregnancy mortality during those hunts. So I don't know if you could comment on that. Is that something that your organization is concerned about or want to publicly comment about?
Chair Finley, Commissioner Woolley. It is certainly a concern that both early in the season and late in the season, there are components. How would I state it? Basically, there are hunters, and especially youth hunters, being exposed to situations that may be less than ideal. I would offer to you that this is a damage situation, and damage occurs in that time frame. I acknowledge that with the agency. And there are existing hunts in those time periods, and I personally actually advocated for those on behalf of youth. I take into account at that time for the existing hunts, from a hunter recruitment point of view, And my hope is that when I'm gone from the planet, that hunting is still legal to do in the state of Oregon. That's my personal agenda. I have to advocate for the fact that there are youth that are involved in sports, especially football, that only have a certain time window to get out there, and this is to accommodate them. As to the greater extent of this general damage hunt, I would offer up that we haven't had a chance to sit down and talk those out. So, for the existing hunts that it's to replace, they're in place right now, and we advocated for them.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just add, I second what Steve just said. All of the groups that are before you today and that have been before you in the past that represent hunters, youth is in their DNA. This is hard for us to understand and to swallow, but we are hopeful that the department will realize how important youth hunts are. They advocate them just as much as we do, and it has not been easy for us. Thank you.
Would you go a little farther? Why has not it been easy for you, Al?
Mr. Chair, for the last few years, I've worked with the people at the back table and their predecessors to get youth before legislative committees, before the governor's office, and to take that YOUTH out of whatever publication. That just to me is not right. But Mr. Thornton has explained to me, Nick has explained to me that there might be more opportunities for people in those areas, youth in particular. And if that's the case, then let's see how that goes, like Steve said. But it's still a very hard thing to look at and realize.
May I quickly?
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Chair Finley and Commissioner Woolley, just I believe maybe to address a little bit of what you asked as well. I do believe that that was perhaps around, additionally around the damage, the new program. And my comment that I would just like to make is that that is a very complex undertaking. It's very many stakeholders on both sides. You've got the hunter aspect, you've got the landowner aspect, and you've got pressure from both sides, and you also have pressure from the legislature to accomplish something. I would say that that is, in particular, though, there is quite a bit of confusion around what that hunt's going to actually do on the ground, the understanding of how that is actually going to look on the ground, and some of those dates play into that as well. So just to offer that in particular, I think maybe could use a little more vetting.
Okay. Another concern I was hearing about was combining hunting units and concern about crowding. Is that also something that you want to mention?
Chair Finley, Commissioner Woolley, that's absolutely a concern. The only reason I did not address it is I didn't realize how fast 3 minutes were going to go. Well, we don't, to be honest, we won't know what that looked like until it occurs. The organization's belief is that crowding is unavoidable with the consolidation. And in some particular hunts, you may have people together that didn't previously because the unit's been consolidated. That doesn't mean the consolidation might not be appropriate. We're just seriously concerned about, to be honest, each of the things that we've brought up, including overcrowding, in another situation would likely to generate a work group process of stakeholders and come out with something that we're all quite supportive of. Doesn't mean universal consensus, okay, that everybody's in agreement. That rarely happens. But the fact something's solid. Like I said, this is a generational change, and I don't know. I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to monitor it and come back next year and go, wow, this worked great, and that one, well, we kind of missed. But that is actually why the organization is looking for sideboards on some of these and a monitoring process so that we can evaluate the change that's occurred.
Thank you.
Commissioners, other questions? Commissioner Wall?
I have one that's general and then one that's pretty specific. The general question is, and I appreciate the way you described it, Steve, that this is a monumental undertaking, and appreciation for the way that it was done, and that there was so much involved. And I have to tell you, from my side of the table, there's a stunning amount of information to try to work your way through. Why, and I think this question is for you, but if other people want to answer it, that's fine. Why do you think that after all of these months and all of this information, a work group is going to change things?
Chair Finley, Commissioner Wall. I'm not saying necessarily that the outcome will change in any one of these. I cannot guarantee that, nor what I guess I'm bringing to the table as a cooperative partner who has a long-term collaboration with ODFW, and I hope ODFW has the same amount of pride in us as how we've worked together on many different issues. Is that at least we would both sides would have a solid understanding. I'm extremely excited that Dr. Jackson's research shows that there may be more bucks than we've seen before, but that research isn't published or peer-reviewed yet, and that is what both groups have stood on for a long time. You know, that science is based, we do conservation and we make hunt choices based on solid science. And that's, I don't know if there'll be a different outcome. I don't.
Thank you. If I can keep going, my specific question has to do with, if you could help me understand whether, when you look at the package that's in front of you and us, is there an increase or a decrease in what people would call fair chase? Have we added to things that people would be concerned about and say we have lessened the fair chase aspects, or have we actually increased those aspects?
Chair Finley, Commissioner Wall. To be honest, it's about 5 seconds ago that I actually thought about that concept when you brought it up. I've not seen anything to my indication that it has been lessened. We certainly have seen a lot about the increase in opportunity, basically in support of the 3 R's. But in terms of lessening it and making it less ethical, I've not seen any indication of that. That's personal in my review.
Okay. Kyle Williams, Stan Steele, Savago.
You're good.
Gentlemen, 3 minutes, except for Stan Steele, he gets 1.
Nice thing.
Let's start with you, Mr. Endicott.
Members of the commission, Chair Finley, Director Melcher, appreciate the opportunity and thank you new commission members, your willingness to serve on this board. You know, I was listening to those questions and I had, you know, some stuff, and I'm going to probably reiterate a little bit of my testimony from the past, and there's only time to, you know, visit 2 issues. One, mule deer, we're in a disastrous situation on mule deer in this state. I mean, if you look even through the public correspondence, and I read through all of it this morning, you know, there isn't a sportsman in the state doesn't realize we're in a drastic situation on mule deer. And it involves a lot of facets, but, you know, there needs to be just an emergency steps taken to rectify that. I mean, in 2010, had all kinds of proposals going forward. Back in 2010, we had a series of 3 meetings. You know, Director Melcher was on board, I think, with most of what our proposals were. We went nowhere with it. Now, today, we stand where we're at. as far as elk goes, these damage permits, in July 11th, Nick Myatt's leadership meeting, his testimony was that this was a shot across the bow from lawmakers. They didn't want the tools to be taken away and management taken away, so we need to issue this. And that was his testimony to leadership on that meeting in Salem on July 11th. You know, a little bit different today in the way it was presented, but you know what? You know, these damage tags, there's nothing more abusive. And you know, on August 1st, it's public land and it's private land. And reading through the public correspondence, many of the people that wrote in said basically that they're concerned. They already have a lot of people knocking on their doors for permission. This is only going to cause it worse. And with the public land, you know, aspect to this, you know, it's going to drive more elk onto the private. And then, you know, the basic concept here is that for 20 years we've been doing damage hunts, and for 20 years we've had a paradigm shift of elk off of the public to private. It's just basic concept. They're stupid animals. Nobody goes out in a damage hunt and shoots all the juvenile animals. They shoot all the adult animals. So you have the herd dynamic taken right out of it. So you have a leadership. They're a herd animal. You have a leadership all shot. The first 5 animals taken in a damage hunt are all big lead cows. Then the second 5 animals they're taken are all lead cows. Then you have no leadership. There was a gentleman here back when we were doing the youth hunt. There was 15 individuals from the sporting community that testified against having August 1st cow youth hunts. And one of them was an individual from Tillamook, and he testified. He said, look, he said, we've done damage hunts. We shoot all the leadership. Next thing we got all the animals out in the highway getting hit because they're not leaving. Because they don't leave. Their leadership, everybody they've followed as an individual, as a juvenile individual, they just died. Their smell's there, their carcass is there, their hide's there. They're not leaving. They're going to stay. It's a martyrdom type of situation with a herd dynamic. And so you shoot the herd dynamic out. Of course, for 20 years, of course, we're going to have more paradigm shift over. The solution is trap and transplant, and to depend on all stakeholder groups to raise money for trap and transplant. We have a lot of places. We just lost 38% 2 years ago, 38% of the Three Sisters Wilderness. It's going to be tremendous elk habitat. That wilderness produced, you know, thousands of animals back in the 60s and 70s that actually lived in that wilderness area. We could have a trap and transplant program. That's what's going to work. Not continuing just to annihilate elk. And then the whole revenue issue. I mean, remove the revenue issue, remove the fee structure from these damage hunts, and you reduce 90% of the damage complaints. I know, I've talked to all the ranchers. I say, hey, how about we come in and we trap and transplant? Oh, you're not taking one step on my property. You're not trapping my elk. Okay, if there's no revenue transfer, right now I have friends, they're outfitters. They are right now leasing up properties, you know, to sell these damage hunts in anticipation of these 4,000 tags. It's a revenue chase. I'm sorry. We killed it in the legislature, this last bill, because I went in there and I'm not going to make any bones about it. It's a revenue-based chase, and that's what drives it. And there's so many more aspects. There's not one sport individual that wants to hear that elk de-emphasis area in Oregon. I mean, how did we get here? How did we get to an elk de-emphasis? We have a fraction of the elk in this state that we normally have. And I could go on and on and on, but
Wayne, you're out of time. You can't go on
okay.
and on.
Well, hopefully we can have some questions because I can answer the questions you
We'll
have.
cover this during questions when we get to it.
Okay,
Kyle.
thank you.
Chair Finley, oh, I guess I better do this so you can hear me, huh?
We need it for the record.
Now? There we go. Chair Finley, Director Melcher, members of the commission. My name is Kyle Williams, and I'm the Director of Forest Protection for the Oregon Forest and Industries Council. Thank you for the opportunity to provide input on the proposed big game regulation changes. If you can bear with me for a moment, Jerome Rosa, the Executive Director of the Oregon Cattlemen's Association, has asked that I share comments on behalf of their organization today. They are as follows. The Oregon Cattlemen's Association's purpose is to advance the economic, political, and social interests of the Oregon cattle industry. As the voice of the cattle industry in Oregon, their mission is to promote environmentally and socially sound industry practices, to promote a positive, contemporary image of the industry, to improve and strengthen the economics of the industry, to assure a strong political presence in all areas affecting the industry, and to protect their industry's communities and private property rights. The Oregon Cattlemen's Association supports, with reservations, proposed changes to the year 2020 hunting regulations. The proposed changes reflect an attempt by ODFW to mitigate elk damage to private property through expanded general season hunts. OCA is concerned, however, that statewide application of the proposed regulation changes
will not facilitate elk damage control in all regions or situations. Different regional and area conditions may affect elk behavior and timing of private land use, and the proposed changes should be amended to allow regional management areas and landowner input into hunting season timing and length. Number 2, the proposed changes should be amended to allow hunters with unfilled elk tags to exchange their general season tags for elk damage control tags. Depending on the specific private land damage situation, hunters who have already filled their general season tags should be allowed to obtain a damage control tag. And that's sincerely Dennis Sheehy, the OCA Wildlife Committee Chair. Additionally, I would say Jonathan Sandow from the Oregon Farm Bureau was unable to make it today, and I will be speaking on behalf of both OFIC and Farm Bureau. And I would just quickly like to share that our organizations also support the establishment of the pilot program for the cow elk tags. The only thing we would offer is that ODFW make it clear that these tags do not guarantee access to private lands, and that hunters still need permission, as in the case with any other hunting tag or season. And secondly, that this pilot will not impact local biologists' roles and determinations in the current landowner damage program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Williams.
Chair Finley, Commission members, Director Melcher, my name is Dan Steele. This is a highly controversial issue. I agree with what Mr. Hagan said, that this is pretty much a once-in-a-generation opportunity to review something that hundreds of thousands of Oregonians participate in. So we don't want to rush through, but we also don't want to hesitate. We have to seize a moment. We have elk damage. The legislature has clearly marked that we're not doing enough. It's a political issue. But it isn't a political issue when it comes to how do we most appropriately deal with a wildlife management issue. That's what the commission is here for and what the department staff works so diligently on. I, for one, have a real problem with some of the things that we've addressed. And we went through a hunter's choice season, and I'm sure some of the old biologists in the room will remember what hunter's choice in Western Oregon did. It was the last 5 days of general buck season in Western Oregon. Any black-tailed deer could be harvested on an unused deer tag. In my time as an OSP field trooper, that was a nightmare. For 2 weeks, the week of the hunt and the week after the hunt, all I did was chase trespass complaints. We had landowner assaults. One elderly farmer south of Corvallis literally was beat because he wouldn't grant permission. Now that's an exception. Obviously, that's not what you expect to see. But when we wide open things have problems. One of my concerns with the tag situation is if we have no deadline, no tag deadline, what's to stop a landowner or others from saying, I've got 20 head of elk out of my pasture now, and he calls all of his friends, and they momentarily buy their tag, and they show up. Earlier, I heard one of you ask the question about, is it ethical? I'm all about ethics in hunting. Is it ethical? No, it's a damage hunt. I think we really need to just understand that's a damage hunt. We're killing animals simply because of the damage. And staff has no other alternative but to follow guidelines sent to them by the legislature. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. Youth hunts are great. But when we provide family opportunities, the national program called Families Afield is where we really could get our youth involved. And that's what not having opportunities to hunt through general tag opportunities, through cutbacks that this is undoubtedly going to have, is we kill more productive elk, we're going to lose animals on the landscape in general. And so other hunts are going to have to be cut back. Some of these hunts are extremely hard, and I see my time's up. Some of these hunts are extremely hard to get now. As Wayne said, and others, there's a lot more to discuss, and I would hope that we would have questions to this panel similar to what we had a few minutes ago. Thank you very much.
Next time you come and testify, I'm taking this time you went over. Mr.
I
Savage.
can't win.
Chair Finley, Director Melcher, members of the commission. My name is Riley Savage. I'm the president of the Traditional Archers of Oregon. So as you can guess, I'm going to be speaking to the expansion of traditional archery opportunities. But before I get to that, I did want to thank Nick and his team for this undertaking. I mean, it is a huge deal. Many resource hours put into this, and thank you for doing it. And he said he didn't get much response on the bear changes. I just wanted to point out that our group is in favor of the bear changes that they put out so far, so thank you for that. Another change that we're also in favor of is the expansion of the traditional archery opportunity in the North Fork of the John Day unit, or North Fork of the John Day Wilderness. Combining a primitive weapon hunt with a wilderness area when it's only limited to 50 people there for 5 days is just going to be a fantastic remote opportunity there. So I just can't wait to go do it next year if this gets passed. As he mentioned, though, the two traditional hunts that we currently have in the state are a bit schizophrenic. One of them, you just need a general tag, and then you can go hunt the first week of the season in the Canyon Creek archery area. The other one, it's a controlled hunt, but it's the only controlled hunt that has unlimited amount of tags. So it's just a little different than everything else we have. What we are proposing is to make both of those areas just a general tag, but limited to traditional equipment only for all 4 weeks of the season, and just be straightforward and simple. Help promote the recruitment, retention, reactivation. I know he said that the Canyon Creek archery area did not have that many hunters there on opening weekend. Granted, I was not there. The first week of the season there is pretty hot. It just burned a few years ago. It's a very small area. It's not a very good hunt the first week of the season, I'm not gonna lie. Next week, I'm gonna be there. It's gonna be a little bit better weather. It's gonna be a better place to go. It's just gonna be a lot better. And then as far as the trout creeks go, that is very close to Oregon, and I'm sorry, very close to Nevada and Idaho. So a lot of non-residents show up there. If we put a cap on the amount of tags that they issue, the non-resident, there is a percentage cap that we can only give to a certain amount to non-residents. There's a huge amount that go there right now because it is unlimited. That revenue source part of it would go away if there's only a limited number of tags that going out there. And I do want to apologize for, after my testimony, for taking off. The elk are calling here and it's elk season, so I've got to get out the door. So thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you for coming, particularly in face of that opportunity. Commissioners, Commissioner Biddle.
Wayne?
Jim?
What would you do, you mentioned the mule deer status. What would you do?
It's such a complex, situation, but, my proposal was a weapon rotation hunt. Plina, Sylvies, Beulah. It was the center of the state. We called it the Core Mule Deer Recovery Plan. It would rotate weapon. It would change to a 15% out-of-state window of participation, which I know is tough because it has to go to the legislature for approval, but what it would do is, one particular year would be one 7-day hunt in the middle of October. It would be the only deer hunt. It would reduce the tags tremendously. It would go archery. Then the next year it would go muzzleloader. The next year it would go to rifle. It would take the tags down to between 70 to 120 tags, Beulah, Sylvies, and Paulina. What it would do is it would prove that $10 per 100 does is not enough. A hind, in an ungulated cervix, it can, one bull elk can service tremendous amount of cows. But because of, the way the deer are structured, it's an argument that between 20 to 25 does is all a buck can service. He has a penal sheath, so he's very injured. All the blood in the snow you see in the wintertime is actually from the bucks bleeding. A lot of times they have infection and die. They cannot service that many does, so we're failing at $10 per 100 does. And in many units, I don't believe that we have that. I mean, I believe we had some testimony earlier I was talking to some gentlemen earlier that hunted Hart Mountain, very, very low buck, doe population in November, not anywhere near the buck population you would need. And, the Auburn deer study, you can Google it. Twins and triplets are directly tied to the amount of male sires on the landscape, because a lot of those deer will come into heat. First time they're bred, second time they're bred, third time they're bred. Each time they take that results in twins and triplets. So your fawning rate is extremely high. The other thing would do is it's in the center of the state. Each one of those units is directly in the center of the state. So 15 units, they combined, they connect 15 units. So then you would have a spin out of those animals. And, I do really appreciate Nick's efforts on all this. And I was more than excited, and I think I testified to this earlier in June, that when this process came out, they were super excited. But, basically a lot of the stakeholders or a public steering committee was ignored. And these are the kind of things I think in the public that, we can come forward. I've had an archery shop for 30 years. Like you, I've heard everybody in that particular industry that's passionate. I mean, everybody comes in, they're passionate. I mean, nobody in this state that hunts wants nothing more than a robust, ungulate and cervet population. Everybody wants to see deer and elk. I mean, we want it. I mean, that's why I say, the term that, elk de-emphasis, I mean, how did we get here? I mean, damage came about because we have a damage bill, and yeah, we're under the thumb on that. But, to restore, we have to take radical measures to restore, and yeah, too much, too quick. We have to have sound science. Marla Ray, Chair Ray said it best. Years back, we were facing something similar. She said the governor didn't appoint us to make decisions on what lawmakers might bring to take our tools away of management. He put us in here to make decisions based on sound science. And this is a slippery slope. These 4,000 tags, it's a horrible slippery slope. Granted, there's some great things proposed here. These traditional hunts are awesome. I mean, it was actually one of my proposals. I think we should do it with Winnehaw, Walla Walla, Mount Emily. I think we should do it with all the states and have a few tags. Because basically, the preference point system's a Ponzi scheme. It goes so long and then it's a Ponzi scheme. Nobody wins. We don't recruit hunters with it. And so if we don't come up with brilliant methods, to shift people through that same hunt series and get them through that preference point system. But management, predators, we're over predators. I mean, when I was a kid, when you were a kid, we had probably 200, 250 full-time trappers. 70s and 80s, a coyote was worth $120. I don't even think anybody's pursuing coyotes. Coyotes destroy deer populations, fawning rates. Cougar populations out of hand in this state. We're over double of what our management objective is. So let's try to put our finger on what we can do. And what we can do is we can do management, and we can do management strategies that are going to work. And that's what's important. That's what we have to do. That's all we can do. Because we can't go back and change the vote of the public. We've tried. I founded OOC, Stan, participated in OOC. Our whole thing was to play, offense and try to bring some kind of healing to the cougar situation in the state of Oregon. We failed miserably because just over and over for a lot of reasons. And so we haven't reversed that. Without the general public hunting cougar with dogs, we don't have that tool. We've got to put our finger on what we can do. And what we can do is brilliant management strategies, like a pilot program, like a 9-year pilot program, core mule deer recovery. It would be the first one in the nation. Weapon rotation hunt, the first one.
Stan, what would you do with this damage tag deadline? Well, what's your thoughts?
Probably, Chair and Commissioner Biddle, I would think that what we would need would be and I realize this is a damage hunt. I mean, just understand that when they show up, and for us to be able to access those, we have to have that ability to have a quick tag, and we don't want staff sitting in an office for hours having to deal with that. That is a problem. But we are going to the technology. Some of us old birds have a problem with that, but we are going to the technology. So I would say at least a 24-hour would be a minimum. I would probably, honestly, from my enforcement perspective, I'd like to see a several day, at least 48 hours. What's to stop these people when it goes from one side of the fence going on to national forest on the other side of the fence and shooting it? And OSP is just going to be ran wild on this if, in fact, we start having a large amount of violations. It's going to be problematic. And honestly, I don't have the answer to that, Commissioner Biddle. I do think, though, that could be a real problem that could harpoon a lot of what we're trying to do.
Commissioners, other questions? Thank you, panel.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one speaker left, James Orr. Are you here, Mr. Orr? We saved the best for last, and you can have your choice of any of those 4 seats.
All right. Excuse me, I'm a little nervous my first time.
Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is James Orr. I live at 94237 Carlson Heights Lane, North Bend, Coos County.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I am a new board member to the Traditional Archers of Oregon. I got into traditional archery through the Trout Creek's opportunity. I drew the tag and I decided to buy a recurve bow and learn how to shoot it. And it completely and totally changed my life in a lot of ways. I operate a traditional bow hunting podcast with over 100,000 downloads in 5 different countries, promoting traditional bow hunting in a positive light. The Trout Creek hunt, I just went and spent 10 days over there. It's an awesome opportunity and one of the most beautiful places in the state. And I do have concern of the tag becoming 300 tags. And as a hunter, I would love to see less people out there. But as somebody wanting to promote traditional bow hunting in a positive light, I want to have that opportunity for everybody. And as you guys had said, we have 1%, we make up 1%, and I think that is skewed. I think the more opportunity we have, the more people will participate in traditional bow hunting, which creates a great opportunity with very low impact on our wildlife. So if we could have that Trout Creek's area, like Riley was saying, unlimited, it's still traditional only, we wouldn't be cutting our brothers and sisters from non-residents, and we would not have to lose that revenue as well. Because I did see a lot of people from other states, big camps from Idaho, Nevada, enjoying that area. So that is something that I would like to see, that we keep intact that opportunity for our non-residents to come enjoy. And creating these traditional only opportunities is growing traditional bow hunting. At one point in time, muzzleloaders hunted with rifles, and now they have been able to carve off their own areas to hunt. I don't mind hunting with modern bow hunters. I do it all the time, but it is nice to have an area that is set aside, and it also seems to could be used as a great management tool because our take is so low. So that's just something I wanted to bring forth to you guys with the traditional archery opportunities. We're also cutting edge in Oregon having these opportunities. I believe there's another one in Kentucky and maybe another Midwest state, but through my podcast, it's gaining a lot of popularity. We have people coming from other states, and we have some folks trying to get these hunts in Nevada, California, Washington, and other states. It's becoming a thing, and I think Oregon's leading the way.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rohr. Questions? I have one for you. Do you feel that during this process your voice was heard?
I was rather nervous, so I'm not even sure if it was or not.
Only Stan Steele would have said that like that.
Were you referring to prior to today, not during the day?
Not today, during the process. I'm sorry. Thank you, Greg. During the public meetings and when the staff assembled this.
Yeah, I also would like to take a chance to thank Nick Myatt. I think that the way you guys are organizing this and allowing him to work with all the different groups really gave us a chance to put our opinions out there and our word out there.
Okay. Good. All right, thanks, Greg, for doing that.
I'd also like to Wayne had mentioned a guy in Hart Mountain. I did put out 14 preference points in our beautiful state to go hunt Hart Mountain, one of the most beautiful places in the world. 5 tag holders there, me and another friend. We witnessed about 400 does, and we saw 6 bucks. We showed up 5 days early for the hunt. This was a 14-year hunt we waited for. I'm not here to whine and complain, but it was lackluster. Thank God the country's beautiful. Something needs to be done.
All right, well, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
All right, is there anyone in the audience that signed up that I missed? We'll close public testimony. This is time for, bring the staff back up and we'll talk to the staff. We'll discuss the issue. We'll bring it to conclusion.
We just have to figure out who wins the cake for the musical chair.
Yes, sir.
Chair Finley, would you mind if I been in the back listening to the testimony and gathered a couple thoughts I'd like to share with the commission for 2 minutes?
I want you to lose them, so please share them with us.
So first of all, I just want to, I'm very humbled by some of the comments we heard, and just want to just appreciate, while worked with a lot of the representatives of support groups we heard from today, and while we've still able to have good professional conversations, and appreciate their input and really value the time that they put into this process and the time they put, and I don't believe most of them get paid to do what they are, so I realize it takes a lot of time to be here. Do really appreciate the work we've had with Oregon Hunters Association. Did want to let the commission know that we didn't get into a lot of the detail of the outreach and work that we've done there. Have been working with Jim Akinson, their representative, every few weeks for this year and even before then. We've had many of the folks that testified today in support group leaders meetings that we've held in Salem in March and July this year. Was also had the opportunity to be the keynote speaker at OHA's meeting in August, where they invite all of their chapter presidents and leadership of their organization, and had over an hour this year and last year to meet with them. So really appreciate that opportunity. So one of the comments we heard from several folks about this is a generational issue that has not been tackled in over 40 years and probably won't be tackled again for 40 years. And I have to say I can't agree more. And when we started this project, that was one of the things that we told the commission is we want to make sure that our regulations and our seasons truly reflect current issues and the current times. And we also want to look to the lens of the younger generation and future generations with our hunting seasons. And through this process, one of the things, in working with folks, I've heard mostly is, how does this change or this opportunity impact me? And how can I get more opportunity for me? Which usually comes at the expense of some other hunter. Been a lot of conversations about that. And I really think that our package of proposals tries to shift the discussion to how can we get more opportunity for our younger generation or our future generations? How does this encourage more people to start hunting? How do we make our regulations so they're not as daunting for a new hunter or a not as experienced hunter to navigate and apply for our hunts? So I think change is scary. It's human nature to be concerned about change and the unknown. And I think someone mentioned that they envisioned the potential for next year sitting down and say, okay, what worked and what didn't work? That's exactly what we envision, what we've said through this process is out of all these changes, there's something we're going to get wrong. And we have the ability to come back next year to the commission and make a change. And the year after that, we can make a change. But if we're if we're so concerned about that change that we never make it, we're not gonna start meeting the goals of this project and improve our regulations for the next generation.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, commissioners, questions? Commissioner Biddle and then Commissioners.
How soon do you guys put this PowerPoint together?
Sorry, what was that?
How soon do you put this PowerPoint together?
Is the question, how much time did it take to put it, or when did we put it together?
How could we get this? Because I know we have it in here. We got this 10 days ago. This is next to impossible to be able to do what we do in our regular life and digest this and to come here and make an educated decision on a really, really critical resource. But what you showed us here today, if we had this to kind of condense it, then go back what catches our interest and get into this, it would make our job a lot easier. I don't know how available it could be to us, even if we got it 4 or 5 days before the meeting. This really simplified it. Any possible way to get this enormous amount of material here in the future? I mean, not on every agenda. You guys know what's coming. And the bigger stuff, it's like, hey, we can help these guys out.
So, Chair Finley, Commissioner Biddle, so in most years where we don't have as many changes to hunting regulations, we come to this meeting in September with this topic, but knowing that we had so many regulation changes this year, we did come to the Commission in June with almost all of these proposals. The difference today with what we presented, what you see in that is the population information graphs and things of that nature, which we typically present at this meeting.
This is the third year I've been a part of the hunting regs. Last year was 7:30. We have no clue what we're gonna get out of here today. My first year was 4:45. So all I'm asking for is a little bit of mercy on these big things. And these hunt regs, even if you don't make a lot of changes, Nick, there's still a lot to digest. You know, especially if we go forward with this, next year we get back and you go, yeah, we missed it here, this is a little better, you know, we go through all of those. This really makes it simple in layman terms, for me anyway, and I don't know if I speak for the commission, but it makes it nice. So if that could be considered in the future, please.
Finley, Commissioner Biddle, the presentation you see there was finished Wednesday, I believe, possibly. So, but we can work on trying to get something together to condense it in a similar fashion.
I got your phone number now, Tom. It's just a thought, guys. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Okay. Commissioner Stelber.
Okay, some questions I've been writing notes all over here, so I'll kind of jump around, but start with just a question, Nick. Would you be against some of these things, like was testified to maybe looking at them over another year, you know, slowing down some of this, because I mean, there is a lot to digest here. And, you know, some of them maybe that can, well, let's see, that I know it's looking at OHA stuff, talked about consolidating 127 hunts into 49, can't help but create more crowding. Anyway, some of that stuff, some of these things, and looking at them over another year, I mean, would you see any benefit to that, or do you think we go backwards?
Chair Finley, who's left, Commissioner Spelberg, I think the one point I wanted to make is that it's a tangled web of hunting seasons where one, I think Tom mentioned earlier, where if we make a change one where that impacts the number of people that apply or go hunting elsewhere in adjacent units and things of that nature. And our preference obviously would be to move forward with staff recommendations. We have spent the last year putting this package of proposals together and have looked at have really spent a lot of time looking at the impacts of the changes, and I would just, I guess, ask what would we do over the next year with these proposals that we